Hey guys, we're going to look at Romans chapter 4, the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans, Christians, both Jews and Gentiles, mixed audience. Remember, his great point in this missional letter, this missionary epistle, is to show unity, and his great theology would level the playing field between people of different cultures so that we wouldn't just think that the Jews, as God's chosen people, have the only inside track and that everyone else has to operate according to plan B. So here, the main question I want to ask as we're looking at Romans 4 in this week's Bible study is, what are you counting on? What are you counting on for your sense of self-worth, self-significance? What are you counting on for your eternal hope, even if we can just say it as clearly as that, right? So for this week's Bible study, I'm going to give you a quick overview now. We'll talk about it, obviously, verse by verse when we meet up over Zoom. But people count on all sorts of things to find significance, to find value. People count on themselves. People count on other people. And often other people let us down, don't they? People sometimes count on their education. But the economy changes and job needs shift, and back to school it is, right? It's sometimes shaky. People count on their own morality, their own sense of, I'm a good person. But then they might do a moral nosedive. They might crash and burn, and then they're devastated. Where's their sense of self-worth? People count on their own strength, power, wealth, wisdom, etc., but then they die. And who will we count on when we stand before God for that ultimate, honest once-over, that evaluation that leaves no rock unturned and no corner that's not illuminated by the holy gaze of God? So, what are you counting on? The self is shaky. God is faithful. This chapter is about taking God at his word. It's about his promise, his truth, his word of true righteousness, a deep righteousness, where we can stop pretending and posing and posturing that we're something that we're really not, and receive the true blessing, the relief, and the rest of deep righteousness. So, just a couple of highlights from the text before we look at it in more detail tomorrow. But Paul is asking, okay, what advantage did Abraham have in being the father of the Jewish people, receiving circumcision as the sign of the covenant, that sort of thing? And he goes into this argument of, we're not made righteous by keeping the law or by, as a Jewish person, being circumcised, but you can interpret that into and extrapolate that into like other religions and other forms of morality. What are you counting on? Are you counting on keeping the law, your own law, someone else's law, society's law, God's law? You can name the law, but is that what you're counting on for self-significance and self-worth and to justify yourself as a human being? And even if we did keep the whole law, Paul essentially says, so what? What have we then done? If we've gone the speed limit, if we haven't murdered someone, if we have even done the positive things of the law, like sharing our wealth or privilege or resources with other people, so what? As Jesus says in Luke chapter 17, verses 8 through 10, he tells us a quick little parable about a servant who helped his master to eat the dinner, and he set the table, and he got all the dishes washed, and at the end of it, he says, now what can the servant say to the master? Hey, look at all the great things I've done. I should get a bonus. I should get a raise. I should get a promotion. I should be set free. He says, no. After all he's done, the only thing he can say is, we're unworthy servants. We've only done our duty. After we've kept all the law, can we even boast in that? Should we count that as righteousness even? Just because we haven't gotten in trouble or gone off the deep end? Paul says, no, that's not the way to be made righteous. Don't count on that. He says, what Abraham did was he received the great promise. He received God's word. A little shaky at first. He didn't quite believe at first. He was wavering in his faith. But in Genesis 15, the story is told of Abraham, the father of the Jews, who looked up at the starry sky. He saw all these countless stars. We know they're in the billions and trillions now. He looked up and saw with his naked eye could see probably hundreds of stars that night, maybe thousands. And he believed the promise of God. And his faith in the promise of God was counted to him as righteousness. That's how we often read the text. But I want to ask a surprising question tomorrow, so be thinking about this. There's this surprisingly impossible line of thinking that tells us it's not Abraham's faith that could actually be counted to him as righteousness. Even though that seems like Paul is saying here in Romans 4, it seems like what the writer of Genesis in chapter 15 is saying. But I want to say it seems rather impossible that Abraham's faith or your faith or my faith could be counted to us as righteousness, because my faith is just as shaky as the rest of my life. Some days it's strong, some days it's not. So be asking yourself the question, what was the it that God counted to Abraham as righteousness? And the text actually says it was his faith, but there's something deeper than just that faith has to hold on to. Our faith is technically bundled with, packaged with, tethered to something else that's stronger than the faith itself. What is that? Well, another surprising question in the text in Romans 4:5, Paul says, but faith in God allows God to justify the ungodly, or call righteous the people that are actually unrighteous or ungodly. Just like in Romans 1:18, we read that the wrath of God was being revealed from heaven against ungodliness. It's the same word here. Wrath is being revealed against ungodliness, but now we're being told that righteousness is being revealed. Romans 1:17, this is the gospel message. Righteousness is being revealed to ungodly people, and if they trust or believe or have faith in God, he justifies those ungodly people. People that deserved wrath, those same ungodly people now get counted as righteous. Very deep and interesting questions here. Paul goes on to quote David from Psalm 32, King David, who you might remember committed murder and adultery, great sins against people and against God. And in Psalm 32, the vehicle of confession, David confessing his sins, it's not an automatic, hey, God makes everyone righteous, but it's those who confess their sins and put their faith in God that stop posturing and posing and pretending, and they enter into this deep blessing, this deep rest, this relief, this real righteousness. I hope that you can experience some of that relief and righteousness as we stop trying to depend on our law-keeping and our self-justification, which actually undercuts God's promise and God's grace. Paul says, don't call God's word into question. Don't call his promise into question. Don't undercut his promise. Don't call God a liar by the way that you live your life and what you depend on, what you count on. Take him at his word and experience that deep blessing and deep rest that faith can give. And not just any faith, faith in Jesus Christ. I hope that as you read the text, more questions will come to your mind, and then we can talk about these things and whatever you come up with. Look forward to talking to you tomorrow. Peace.